We are taught to wait for the lightning bolt. We look for the grand epiphany or the life-changing breakthrough. But have you ever noticed a much smaller signal? Perhaps it was a sudden urge to buy a specific book, a fleeting impulse to take a different route home, or a tiny spark of curiosity about a topic that has nothing to do with your career. Most of us dismiss these moments as distractions. We label them as random noise in a busy mind. But ignoring these subtle shifts may be the reason the path ahead feels so stagnant. What if these quiet impulses aren't distractions at all? There is a hidden mechanism behind these small sparks of interest. It is a navigation system that most people have forgotten how to read. We often wait for a sign that feels as heavy as the decision we are making. We look for a booming voice or a clear, logical map before we take a single step. But have you ever noticed how life actually tends to move? Think back to a time when a major opportunity arrived in your life. Was it always preceded by a grand announcement? Or did it start with a casual conversation you almost didn't have? Most of us have felt that sudden, quiet pull towards something seemingly trivial. We feel a brief spark of interest in a new hobby, or a strange urge to visit a part of town we usually avoid. Something unusual happens in these moments. When we follow that tiny thread, the day seems to open up. Doors appear where there were only walls. But when we dismiss these impulses as unproductive, the flow seems to vanish just as quickly as it arrived. This pattern appears more often than we realize, yet we continue to overlook the most consistent signal we possess. It suggests that we may have been misinterpreting the language of our own intuition. Stay with me, because the mechanism behind these quiet signals is far simpler than most people imagine. Have you ever noticed how some days seem to unfold with an almost eerie precision? You think of someone, and they call. You encounter a problem, and the solution appears on a random billboard or in a passing conversation. In these moments, life feels like a downstream current. Everything aligns without effort. But then the wind shifts. You might spend weeks pushing against a project that refuses to move. You feel a persistent sense of heavy friction, as if you are swimming against a tide that doesn't want you there. Most people dismiss this as a simple string of good or bad luck. We call it having a bad week or being on a roll. But this is where the pattern becomes clear. These shifts aren't random fluctuations of the outside world. If you look closely, you'll see the same cycle repeating in your career, your relationships, and even your creative ideas. The consistency suggests something deeper than mere coincidence. It points toward a hidden structure that responds to something inside of us. Why does the flow appear so suddenly, only to vanish the moment we try to force it? The repetition begins to reveal a strange truth. We aren't just experiencing reality, we are tuning into it. This is where the experience begins to make sense. We have been conditioned to see excitement as a mere emotional reaction to an external event. We think we feel excited because something good happened. But the reality is actually the inverse. In the framework of this teaching, excitement is not an emotion. It is a physical translation of a vibrational signal. It is the language your consciousness uses to tell you that you are currently looking at a path that aligns with your true nature. This reveals something important about how reality works. Those tiny sparks of curiosity, the ones we often dismiss as small or irrelevant, are actually pings from a guidance system. They are indicators that a specific action or thought is true for you in that moment. We often overlook this mechanism because it operates so quietly, appearing as a simple preference or a subtle pull toward a specific idea. It is far simpler than we expect. Rather than waiting for a massive life purpose to land in our laps, we are invited to see that the signal has been present all along. It arrives in small, manageable doses, acting as a compass for the very next step. But if excitement is a signal, how exactly does it navigate us through a world of infinite possibilities? To understand why this happens, we have to look at the underlying structure of our experience. We often think of our lives as a single, solid timeline, but the mechanism behind the pattern suggests something different. Think of your reality as a series of radio frequencies existing simultaneously. Every moment, you are tuned to a specific station. When you feel that small, quiet spark of excitement, you aren't just feeling an emotion, you are receiving a signal that a different frequency is available.
This explains why the pattern behaves this way. When you follow that tiny impulse, you are effectively turning the dial. You shift from a frequency of effort and friction to a frequency of flow and alignment. This is the hidden rule behind the experience. Reality does not happen to you. It reflects the station you have selected. Suddenly, the shift begins to make sense. Why does the flow disappear the moment we ignore the signal? Because by dismissing the impulse, we have manually tuned back to a frequency of stagnation. This system has been operating in your life since the moment you were born, quietly guiding every ordinary decision you've ever made. You have always been the navigator, even when you thought you were just a passenger. By recognizing this mechanism, you realize that a small shift in interest is actually a massive shift in direction. If the mechanism is this simple, why do we find it so difficult to trust? The reason is rarely external.
It lives in the quiet conversations we have with ourselves, the moment a spark of interest arrives. This is the moment the inner voice begins to argue. We feel a pull toward a new idea, but immediately our conditioning intervenes. We tell ourselves that curiosity is a luxury we can't afford. We believe that if a path isn't difficult or logical, it must be irresponsible. This is where many of us lose the signal. We have been trained to equate caution with intelligence and resistance with maturity. We mistake the internal friction of fear for the voice of wisdom. But how often do we talk ourselves out of something that felt exactly right? When we silence the signal in favor of what is realistic, we unknowingly disconnect from the very flow we've been seeking. The excitement is replaced by a heavy sense of obligation, and the momentum we felt just moments ago evaporates. We find ourselves back in the current of effort, wondering why the doors have closed again. I'm curious if you've ever felt this quiet signal and ignored it because it seemed too small to matter. If you've experienced these moments of internal tug-of-war, share your story in the comments. How different would a day feel if you followed the signal instead of the fear? To begin, you don't need a grand plan. You only need to look at the options available to you right now. Identify the one activity that contains even a fraction more excitement than the others.
It might be as simple as making a phone call, going for a walk, or researching a specific topic. Act on that impulse to the best of your ability. Follow it as far as you naturally can until you can take it no further. This is where the navigation begins. The key is to move with curiosity rather than pressure. Once that specific thread of excitement ends, look around again. Find the next tiny spark and repeat the process. Crucially, you must release any attachment to what the outcome should look like. When you act without insisting on a specific result, you allow the mechanism to work without interference. This is how the signal becomes action, and how the shift in your reality actually starts. You are essentially telling the universe that you are ready for more of that specific frequency. If this perspective resonates with you, consider subscribing for more explorations into how consciousness and reality interact. The change rarely starts with something dramatic. It usually begins in the gaps between your scheduled tasks. Imagine you are sitting at your desk, overwhelmed by a long list of obligations. Suddenly, a quiet thought surfaces. You feel a sudden urge to look up a specific documentary you heard about months ago. Your logical mind calls it a distraction, but instead of dismissing it, you decide to follow that small spark of curiosity. While searching for the film, you stumble across a comment or a related link that addresses the exact problem you were struggling with at work. This is often how the shift begins. By following that 5-minute impulse, you unknowingly tuned yourself to a frequency where solutions are visible. You might have experienced similar moments before without realizing their significance, perhaps dismissing them as lucky coincidences. But have you ever noticed how a single, random conversation can change the entire direction of your week? The signal usually appears in these small moments, hiding behind the mundane. When you treat these impulses as navigation pings rather than distractions, you begin to see that life is constantly trying to hand you the thread of your own momentum. This suggests something remarkable about the nature of experience.
We often move through life as if we are traveling a single fixed road, but the pattern we have explored reveals a deeper meaning. It implies that you are not just walking a path, but continuously selecting one from a field of infinite possibilities. When you follow the quiet signal of excitement, you are doing more than just choosing a task. You are aligning with a specific version of reality that already exists. This changes the way we understand the experience of living. It suggests that the life you seek is not something you have to build from scratch, but a frequency you have to tune into.
Could these signals be guiding us toward versions of ourselves we have not yet explored? This realization shifts our perspective from one of constant struggle to one of active alignment. You may already be standing at the threshold of this realization in your own life, noticing that the more you trust the small sparks, the more the world seems to reorganize itself around you. Reality is not a solid, immovable object. It is a mirror reflecting the signals you choose to prioritize. The journey of alignment doesn't require a monumental leap. It begins with the simple willingness to acknowledge the signals you have spent a lifetime ignoring. Perhaps the signal has been there all along, hidden within the mundane choices of your afternoon. As you move through the rest of your day, you may begin to notice patterns in small events that previously seemed random. You might find that the world feels slightly more responsive, or that a quiet impulse carries more weight than it did this morning. Sometimes the shift begins simply by noticing. How often have these moments appeared quietly in your life, waiting for you to turn the dial? What subtle impulse is waiting for your attention right now? If you are ready to see how these signals bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be, the next chapter of this exploration reveals what happens when you consistently follow the thread of your highest excitement.